All right, all right, all right. Let's crack it open. Let's crack this thing open. Ankylosaurus. Talking about ankylosaurus. It is Earth Day. Ankylosaurus, as I discuss in my book, Dinosaur Enlightenment. Pick it up. It's so heavy. It's so heavy. Everything about it is very heavy. Um, Ankylosaurus, as I discussed in my book, uh, had an outsized ecological effect in the environment. I very much posit them as terraformers in the most literal sense of the word. That these were earth movers par excellence, and I really had to like do an overhaul of how I pictured, moving soil as a big animal. We tend to think of it as clawing at it, having these big nails, these trough-like nails that could tear up soil. But ankylosaurs didn't have that. Does that mean that they were just kind of ill-equipped for moving soil? No. As I discussed in this book, you reach a certain size where it becomes more mechanically advantageous, I believe, to start moving soil with your head, to use your head as kind of a shovel. And if you look at ankylosaurs and a lot of other animals that I believe have been overlooked as terraforming agents in the past, that we sort of started to broaden our view of how these soil moving behemoths operated as true biological tractors. So when you look at it's kind of a cool model. It's a little cartoony, but overall I think the dimensions and stuff are pretty cool. You have these horns, rear flanges coming off the rear guard of the skull and down by the lower jaw, and these were usually thought of as like ornamental, or maybe they jousted with them a bit, which is definitely possible. But what I'm suggesting is they had a mechanical property too, and that was to gouge into and to disrupt soil. And the way they do that is the way they would do this is just to lower their head, almost like when a bull is lowering its head to charge, to lower their head, and that would put these horns in contact with the soil. And so basically, as I diagram here, you have the you're looking at the soil here. Then they lower their head and kind of gouge into the soil, and then once the horns make purchase, again they have these cutting edges and they're kind of beveled. Once the horns make purchase in the soil, then the whole mass and muscular body of the animal can be used to literally plow into and up the soil, and that creates as you see in the bottom parts of the depiction, that could really, it's like a moving spade going across the landscape. And so this is really a niche that I think Ankylosaurus really got really good at. And there's all kinds of good stuff in the soil, not just roots and tubers and fungi, but during the Mesozoic, lots and lots of eggs. And if you read my book, I do a pretty disturbing a little vignette between this is not a Tyrannosaurus, but this is Zarapelta, but basically suggests that a lot of ankylosaurs would have routinely raided the nests of other dinosaurs. And here's a Zarapelta with a nondescript carcharodontosaurid that's got a little loose lip. It took a little whack from the tail there. So, and really, if you think about it, if you were to design a nest raider, you couldn't do much better than an ankylosaur. Here's an animal that's armor, that's low to the ground, can sniff out stuff. If you had Ankylosaurus, which I have tattooed right here, Ankylosaurus has stereoscopic nostrils, or kind of spaced a little further apart than other ankylosaurs, giving it a potential ability like a almost like a hammerhead shark to kind of zero in on select choice bits of food, including buried eggs. So there's, and I was just watching a video of a snapping turtle that had crawled out of the aquatic muck and was raiding a goose nest. I think it was Canadian geese. And Canadian geese, of course, all geese have kind of a reputation for belligerence. But these birds couldn't do nothing against the snapping turtle, and I think it was much the case that if an animal like this wanted to raid your nest, it pretty much could have. And that's a really reliable and annual source of fats and proteins and the calcium for the egg itself. So I think we kind of fell in love with the omnivorous, the pig-like ceratopsid, but I think these really were the pigs of the Mesozoic. And speaking of pigs, pigs are kind of a close analogy to what we have for a modern rototiller, rooting around, digging up the soil. But I think this niche has always been with us, and it's been kind of missed in deep time, because we don't translate how a pig type animal would operate if it had the kind of body type of a big ground bird or giant sloths or stem elephants. And so I think I think some people recognize this, but I think this niche has always been exploited and with us, so much so that when ankylosaurs kind of take either go extinct or not really, or kind of take a hiatus in parts of Gondwana land, especially South America, what do we see but crocodilomorphs, notosuchids, kind of armadillosuchus, animals like this kind of taking up the slack ecologically in that niche. And so, and of course, Dicynodonts were probably some of the first and best ecological rototillers. And so here's the massive Lysowickia just tearing up the Triassic landscape, digging up all kinds of roots. And it's here we see a kind of a pattern in a lot of these ground digging animals, is that they start to lose their teeth. And I think that has a lot to do with just the amount of grit they're encountering, that it becomes counterproductive to grow this expensive enamel that gets worn away through grit. That doesn't mean they didn't chew their food. And what all these animals had is extensive secondary palates and the evidence of probably large tongue musculature. As you can see, here's a tongue right here just slopping around. And what I would suggest is that, and this has been definitely put forth for these guys, is they had a pretty mobile, extensive tongue musculature. And what is possible, what I suggest in my book, is that they would use their tongue against the roof of their mouth, against their palate, as like a scouring pad to kind of rasp and chew up food. And that would and that way they could that weird signal we're getting, where as these animals evolve, they're getting smaller and daintier teeth, but they're getting bigger and bigger, which doesn't make sense for like a mega herbivore to keep reducing its teeth, unless it was having so much grit that it became more economically viable to chew the food with the tongue against the roof of the mouth, and that way you're not having this high attrition rate of an enamel. So what I put forth is that there's been kind of a cryptic ecological lineage of rototilling behemoths through deep time. There's a couple of them here, and kind of a diverse set of characters. We've probably heard of the shovel-toothed gomphotheres and various stem elephants. Very low slung to the ground, and they have these massive tusks and these big kind of flat trunks, really muscular. It's been suggested they would have somehow scoured at the bark of trees but I don't really think they're built that way. They're built much more low to the ground, much more stronger, much shoulder to leverage into and dig into the soil, I believe is what they're doing. Uh, Glyptodonts are another one, and some of these even have evidence for like something analogous to the rhinarial disc of suids, the kind of muscular kind of nose appendage that assists in rooting and sniffing around in the soil. So I think Glyptodons are another definitely probable rototiller, especially with their head as a big shovel, as a big spade. And we have those big paleo burrows from South America now that we think maybe giant sloths were probably culprits, but it could have been sloths and these guys cohabitating, or both of them going in there. There's Simosuchus, another he's got kind of a spade-shaped head. Adosaurs, again, we see that pattern where they start to diminish and lose their teeth. Just because there's so much grit they're encountering, it's so expensive to keep beating up their enamel. They would just swallow it or gum it or chew it with their tongues. And some interesting, unexpected ones would be the giant, extinct, big-headed birds, the dromaeonorthids and the gastronorthids. Dromaeonorthids, often referred to as, I think, like the pteroducks or the pterogeese of Australia. Let me see if I say this right. Mihirungas. But they have these big flanges going at the top of the head and these big, strong jaws. And what I believe they were doing is that they would kind of auger into the ground with those kind of strong jaws. They could auger like almost like a post hole digger to get perches in the ground, and then with the big strong flange of a head, they could use that side to side to shovel away the dirt once it's loosened up and to get it, nutritious roots and gourds and whatnot. And the funny one too, the unexpected one, is the giant, Koopa Troopa himself, Myolania, from Australasia, Oceania, I think. But it had all the same features, including kind of a neat area suggested of a kind of a suid-like nose situation. But these, like Ankylosaurus, had those kind of spiky rear guard of the spiky rear guard of structures that could be lowered and gouged into the soil and disrupt the soil and take the soil and then get into the goodies below. So we kind of missed, I think, a lot of these. And if you look at the traits, they're all sturdy, low to the ground. They have some structure they could dig into the soil with. And none of them actually have digging claws, as we picture like a grizzly bear having. They would dig with their heads or their noses or even the tops of their skulls or flanges or structures coming off the skull. And, largely kind of cryptic or unappreciated. But when you really think about the ubiquity of pigs and how they've got around, it's kind of a timeless niche, this kind of rototiller. And you could also argue that, as humans have expanded across the globe, we've taken with us this omnivorous rototilling, therian, terraforming pig. And it really, once it gets in an environment, it's pretty much there to stay. Pigzilla, whatnot. You got feral pigs all over the Americas, Australia, and it's kind of a timeless niche. And it's a niche you really think about in terms of, carbon flow, because we don't really appreciate the flux of carbon that comes with all these animals digging and turning up the soil. And I think it's something we really should take into account of. And one thing is interesting is when you have cooler climates, a a lot of plants are going to invest in underground rhizomes, underground starchy stems and roots to survive the cold season or to survive extreme seasonality. And this is going to increase the niche space for these kind of pig-like or rooting animals to go after all those underground resources. And so what might happen is as things get kind of colder and plants invest in these underground structures, and then you have animals, ankylosaurs, pigs, whatever, going after these underground resources, they're going to create carbon flux in mass and bring carbon back up to the stratosphere and maybe start heating up the earth through their own biological activities. And so a controversial, because it doesn't really go with the political sentiment of the time, is that life tends to creep towards warmer conditions. That's been the more or less the kind of pattern in Earth's history, is that things get cold, but we're more dominated by warm periods than ice box. Ice boxes are the exception rather than the rule. If you look, even most of the Cenozoic was warmer than now. So it doesn't flow with kind of modern environmental consciousness, but life seems to prefer it on the warmer side. And hey, maybe we do too. Actually, we are tropical naked apes. We're not Arctic animals. Which brings me to the next kind of character in the earth-moving saga is Cetacosaurus. And here's Cetacosaurus sibiricus. And it had this cool shovel of a head disrupting tons of soil. And these things are so common, it's still a mess of species, and there's probably some duplicity there, but there's a little Biocrons named after these guys. These guys were immensely successful, widespread across at least the Asian landmass. And, if, as I suggest, and I think other people are leaning into this too, that they were fossorial burrowing animals, the sheer number of them, the sheer ubiquity of them, they probably had an effect on, the atmosphere. The shuffling all around that carbon, putting it back in the atmosphere, that's moving carbon around. That's going to have an effect. Another thing I mentioned about, on the topic of Cetacosaurids is that rear flange of those bristles coming off the back of their tail, I suggest, as an anti-predator device, so that when they were kind of a see-through cross-section of a burrow, if they were kind of stuffed away in here, all that's sticking out would be those kind of rear quills, and so that would get a nasty purchase for any predator trying to get at them. And you can see a convergence. There's a possible convergence in African porcupines. They got that rear guard of quills. They do seek shelter in burrows. So if you were an African porcupine down in your burrow and somebody's trying to dig you out, a lion or something, it's gonna come into those quills. It's gonna face full of quills. So this is my Earth Day special. It's still Earth Day. I didn't know it was Earth Day, and I feel kind of bad about that. I didn't know it was Earth Day. Shout out to Rokaryu. He did a little manga strip with reference to some terraforming dinosaurs, and check him out, Rokaryu. So Earth Day, terraforming dinosaurs, kaiju dinosaurs is all connected. These not just dinosaurs, but animals, big animals in particular, I think we're just starting to appreciate the interface they have with not just the environment, but carbon dioxide and the carbon cycle. And, it's probably not politically correct to say this, but I think on the whole, animals like things moving in a warmer direction, and I think that's where we'd probably be going with or without us. We're just speeding it along because we are big animals that like it warm. So, and just as in the Mesozoic, the biggest landmass would have been in the temperate bands, the kind of Asian, Eurasian, North American land masses. Getting those into profitable ecological, getting those areas greened up would have been in the interest of. And it's not that like they have a plan to do it. It just life happens this way. I think it's this whole concept of Gaia, the dinosaur Gaia, that life moves towards greater complexity and life creates conditions that beget more life. So probably stepped in it with this one, but I'm not saying that the rate of temperature increase is good. We are definitely in an ecological crisis. And I would suggest that getting more humans on the landscape performing agriculture in a less mechanized, less industrial way would be better for us and better for the planet and better for the diversity of animals. Probably the single best thing we do is regenerative agriculture, carbon capture agriculture. Doing that and getting more big animals on the landscape. I think big animals act as a buffer to extreme fluctuations, things getting too hot or getting too cold. I discussed that in my book too, but it's a controversial subject, it's rewilding, but I think that we are agents that could make it happen, and probably not a popular opinion among most of my kindred spirits, but yeah, I think getting big animals back on the landscape as best we can is a good thing for not just the ecology, but they act as mitigators to extreme fluctuations in climate, either going too hot or too cold too rapidly. So, book signing this Saturday, 1 to 3, Bank of Books in Ventura. Hopefully check you out there, and hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was thought-provoking, and I'll check you later.